Good afternoon. I am Brother Zachary, our chaplain for pastoral care here at the Community Church, and I welcome you on behalf of our ministry team, our staff, and all our lay leaders. It is good to be together, both in person and online. Community Church is a multiracial, multicultural, multi-generational congregation with a vision and commitment to build a world grounded in equity and inclusion. With me today is Reverend Jude Geiger, our Minister for Community Engagement, Jonathan Long, our talented soloist, and Jerry Brown, our gifted director of music. Community Church is in transition. We have sold our church building and are in the process of finding another in this neighborhood. We are guests here, for which we are grateful, even if this beautiful space isn't perfectly reflective of our theology. Children are always welcome during worship. Please feel free to move around the space, or when in-person programming returns this fall, to join children's programming that will happen in the loft upstairs. The sound of babies crying, or children fidgeting, or just about anyone fidgeting is a beautiful part of being in community. Masks are optional. We ask that everyone please be respectful of each other's decisions and need for personal space. If you have a cold, please consider masking or moving to a space in the room you are less likely to infect others. Today's service is titled When Goodness Happens and is part 4 in a 5-part preaching series on the ethics of James Luther Adams. Please rise in body or in spirit and join me in singing hymn number 1024 in the Teal hymnal, When the Spirit Says Do.
You got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do, oh Lord. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. 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 You got to do when the Spirit says do. You got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do, oh Lord. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. 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 Spirit says do.
Yes.
We gather once more around our sacred fire, much like the generations have since the dawn of humanity, to share story and song. We make holy this place through our commitment to gather. From the light we carry in our hearts, we soon will rekindle this flame as a beacon of our progressive religious faith. I invite you to join in Rise Up, O Flame.
Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing. Show to us beauty, vision, and joy. Rise up, O flame, by
We light this candle, the flame of our heritage. May it ignite hope in our lives, in our community, and in the world. Please join me in reciting our unison affirmation found in your bulletin. Unto the Church Universal, which is the depository of all ancient wisdom and the school of all modern thought, which recognizes in all prophets a harmony, in all scriptures a unity, and through all dispensations a continuity, which abjures all that separates and divides, and always magnifies humanity and peace, which seeks truth in freedom, justice in love, and individual discipline in social duty, and which shall make of all persons one beloved community. Unto this church and unto all its members, known and unknown throughout the world, we pledge the allegiance of our hands and hearts. Please join me in reciting our land acknowledgement, also found in your bulletin. We are gathered on the unceded land of the Lenape peoples. We acknowledge the Lenape community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Now is the time in our service to greet your neighbor. Please share a COVID-safe greeting with those around you. Thank you. Now begins our time of centering. I will begin by ringing the chime, followed by a brief moment of silence. And for our spoken prayer, I will be sharing a prayer for moving forward that comes to us from UU Minister Joe Von Roo. We begin with a chime and silence. Spirit of life and love, God of many names and yet none at all. Our hearts are stretched thin. We see and hear the devaluing of people of color, of those with disabilities, of women, of immigrants. This list, incomplete as it is exhausting. And yet, we hold fast because we carry hope in our hearts. Hope that together we can dismantle systems of oppression. Hope that the collective of American humanity will look at one another and say, "This has got to change." However thin our resilience may be wearing, we do not give up or give in. We look around and see our friends and neighbors carrying signs, moving, marching together because we must not give up. We join thousands of people in streets. We move for justice. We live for peace. We will not rest until we are heard. We will not rest until equity is made more real, all around us. And, Spirit of life, we look within our own hearts to the burning coal that is at the center of our being, the place where our hope for the world lives, the place where our faith in humanity resides. And there we find the strength and courage to continue moving, however muddy and rough the path may be. Please join me now in reflection as we receive a musical meditation entitled March to Zion by Kurt Weill and Franz Werfel. Our reading this afternoon is entitled Joyfully Surprised and is by Adrian L. H. Graham. Adrian L. H. Graham, he, him pronouns, is a lover of human culture, especially as manifested through food, music, language, and religious expression. Considering himself a evangelist, he serves as Director of Congregational Engagement at the UU Congregation of Rockville, Maryland, and as Secretary of the UUA Commission on Appraisal, and is currently a ministerial aspirant pursuing the Master's of Divinity degree. We have to dare to be ourselves, however frightening or strange that self may prove to be. May Sarton. I spent an entire year brooding over whether and when to come out to my family. I had a little practice with some close friends in college, and later with a few friends from high school. Looking back on the experience, now I can almost laugh at myself, or at least smile. The first few times I essentially announced, after much beating around the bush, that Adrian is not straight. That was the most direct I had ever been in my entire life. Before we got to that point, one of my friends tried to clue the others in with a metaphor that began something like, well, there are apple trees and there are orange trees. In hindsight, watching them try to figure out what the heck she was talking about was hilarious. But at the time, I could not find my laughter. I was consumed with fear, and all I could think was, what if they reject me? In the end, they did not reject me. Sure, there were a few minor bumps here or there, mostly learning experiences for my benefit, but they held me in love and continue to do so to this day. What a blessing. Coming out to my family might have been one of the hardest things I've had to do. We held to traditional religious values when it came to culture and social concerns. At least that's what I was taught. In the end, I realized that my choice was one of life and death, and I needed to let my secret out in order to continue living and to do so authentically. My friends stuck with me through that entire year of brooding. It was hard, and I was scared, and they held me in love. I'm not sure I could have faced the challenge without them. We did it together. Today, I continue to be joyfully surprised by my mere existence. And I am forever grateful to them and ever mindful of how I offer my presence to others. God of compassion and companionship and presence, be with us always and draw near to us in times of fear and uncertainty. Teach us to hold one another gently and in abundant love. Show us the ways we can nurture authenticity, wholeness, and peace in ourselves and in one another. Please rise in body or spirit and join me in singing hymn number 1064, Blue Boat Home.
the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home.
Beautiful, thank you both. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
The prior 3 weeks, I've spoke at length about the theology and the ethics of James Luther Adams and his concept of the 5 stones. If this is the first time you're hearing about it, real briefly, I'm going to try to catch you up in a few sentences. He was one of our Unitarian theologians who was physically active in trying to stave off the rise of Nazism in Germany before he moved back to the States and became a public theologian at Harvard Divinity School. I'm going to be working through each one of these stones and, in short, around why they call them stones. This was the original metaphor in the Jewish scripture for David and Goliath, and how those 5 stones David used in a sling in modern language to combat oppression. After today, next Sunday will be the last one to cover, but today I'm going to focus on the 4th stone in Adam's theology. That precept, paraphrased again, each child that's born is another redeemer. We are all potential sources of good in the world, and each have a role to play. Goodness happens in relationships with one another. Each child that's born is another redeemer. In the first 3, we were looking at how his teachings were helping us to struggle with all the aspects of the rise of Nazism, and it's as accurate today with all the rise of the alt-right and fascism in our country and abroad. And we've looked at the broader oppressions, which are intrinsic to fascism, to white supremacy. And we looked at the second sermon, a little bit about community. How does everyday community teach us and nurture us as institutions and neighborhoods to not fall prey to propaganda? And this week, we're going to be looking at another aspect of fascism that's intrinsic to it, misogyny. It goes part and parcel, power over rather than power with. The point of oppression, the point of fascism is to get away with, is to bully, is to make a point of showing that you can get away with a thing. I want to start out with a story, like I've done with each one of these sermons, and then we'll get back into the ethics. When I was a child, one of the worst insults another kid could make toward a boy was to say they acted like a girl, or threw like a girl, or ran or walked like a girl. Man up would mean toughen up. Being a guy meant being strong and loud and taking up space. And the barbs would come from boys for sure, but those barbs would also come from girls. It would be ingrained by implicit actions, by adult men and by adult women. As kids, we would voice aloud the stuff that we would quietly live by as adults later, maybe. It's communal sickness. It's a sickness in our culture that strives to denigrate half of our population, at least, in order to apparently lift up the other half. But it only does so in appearance. When boys and men are raised to think masculinity has only one form, we box in our boys' potential, our kids' potential, as we diminish the worth of our girls. No one wins, everyone loses. The pain is merely felt differently for each of us, but the pain is real, and many of us carry that, if not all of us, throughout the rest of our lives. And although we're all diminished, girls' and women's safety is put up as the gamble. And we see this like clockwork in the politics of today with the rise of alt-right and fascism. The first targets are women and other vulnerable communities, people of color, our trans communities. And Adams reminds us that goodness happens in relationships with one another. Each child that's born is another redeemer. And it continues well on into adulthood. The worst excesses get normalized as harmless. Locker room talk, we've heard that over and over our whole lives, but particularly in the last 6 years. When what is actually being bantered about amounts to sexual assault. But people will feel confident, some people, to say out loud that that's just locker room talk. And we don't have to go to that extreme to see it in our daily lives, at work or out and about. Take note who takes up room in discussions. Note how we are trained and raised to speak or not to speak. Who gets to repeat the same tired point over and over until folks are beaten into submission, and who struggles to whisper their view even once. Misogyny is a sickness, and it's part and parcel with fascism, and it's part and parcel with white supremacy. And we're swimming in it. We're swimming in it so that some of us normalize it, some never notice it, and some are being killed by it. We're living in a culture where several women can accuse a public or political figure of sexual assault, and a mainstream media pundits will punish them by tweeting out the woman's home address and phone number. And this is a difficult topic to talk about. And as we're going to see this ramping up more and more in our political cycles in the next 6 months, I think it's important periodically to say it out loud so that the normal horribleness doesn't become ingrained in the status quo any more than it already is. If we wonder why some women do not speak out loud in a timely manner after the worst happens, we only have to look to that, the doxing, the revealing whose people's identities are in their home, as one reason among many. And we're seeing it worsen now as our social media platforms are taking off the third rail. They're allowing anyone to say or do whatever they want to someone, and they're even threatening to remove blocking so that someone could be stalked on social media. How traumatic that is for the victim and how traumatic that is for anyone watching it, especially women, especially others who have been victimized, regardless of gender. And each of those victims and each of those folks that relate to that are put in their place once again. The point of fascism is to show you have power over and not with. So you do the thing. The point of the thing is the ridicule, not the action. It's a sickness, it demoralizes and victimizes, and sometimes it kills. And we have to remember that goodness happens in relationships with one another. Each child that's born is another redeemer. We are not by nature powerless, but some of the dominant paradigms try to teach us that we're powerless. Theologically, to lean into the Christian side of our tradition, misogyny is another form of original sin. We don't need to have done anything to be infected by it. Men, women, all people raised in our culture must deal with its imprint on our psyches and our souls. We're born into it, infected by it in the air, and live lives that replicate the systems of abuse if we're not critical, knowingly or unwittingly, even as many of us are victims of it, because we're all victims of that. But even if we've done nothing to deserve the sin of misogyny, in order for healing, we need to address it. For some of us, we're victims, and a whole range of support systems may need to be relied on for healing, for safety, for justice. And if that's true for you and you need help, please reach out to Reverend Peggy, our senior minister, Brother Zachary, or myself. And I guess I should say for myself, in a broader context, although I've not been a victim of the kind of assault we're talking about, I grew up young and gay and got gay bashed 20 or 30 times in my life. So it's a heavy conversation, and I think it's important that we as a community don't allow what's happening out there to become a normal in how we see the day-to-day. And some of us have internalized it so much that we contribute without knowing the damage we do, in some ways large, in some ways small. If I go back to my childhood, being a guy meant being strong, and I wasn't, and loud, and I wasn't, and taking up space, and I didn't. The flip side meant that being a girl meant being weaker and being a dormouse. And thankfully that image is radically changing as our role models are radically changing on who's allowed to be a role model in our space, all shapes and sizes. When we find ourselves living by either of those false truths, that a boy is a certain way, a girl is a certain way, we need to seek to push ourselves to break free from that bind, even if the person saying it isn't ourselves to ourselves. Binding lies break our spirits, harm our world, and risk our lives. And for the men in the room, and for those that this applies to, we all can do better. We need to be a little more believing of women who say they're in danger. We need to be a little more gracious with the space we dominate. We need to be less permissive of supposed locker room talk when we hear it. Women become less safe and men become less human. And we pretend that language that perpetuates this kind of assault is harmless in our personal fantasies. It's not harmless, and it doesn't further the peace, and it doesn't make space for women, and not only women, to be themselves without fear of harm. Goodness happens in relationships with one another. Each child that's born is another redeemer. If we look back to last week's sermon, we were talking so much about covenant, about how mutuality and community requires consent, and that's a foundation to this next. It creates a space to imagine that every child that's born could be another redeemer. We need to create those safer spaces so that we can all flourish. What does that mean theologically for our culture? If every child that's born is another redeemer, then misogyny is a lie. We're not better than any other soul because of the happenstance of our birth. Any ethic that lifts one group up over another is a spiritual lie that erodes our conscience and diminishes our humanity. Each girl that's born is another redeemer, and we ought to treat one another appropriately with care and support. Our common humanity is wrapped up in the common redemption of all people. Each of us has the potential to redeem the broken corners of our world. That is another way of talking about the beloved community that we recite at the beginning of every service. And we're soon coming upon the Jewish high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur next month. Throughout the Jewish religious life, these holy days teach us wisely to admit our failings and atone for the harm we've brought into this world, and I'm not connecting that to someone being a victim of assault. I'm talking about some wisdom that those holidays remind all of us here. How we harm through our actions or lack or inaction. There's a teaching that comes from an 18th century Hasidic proverb. Keep two truths in your pocket and take them out according to the need of the moment. Let one be, for my sake, the world was created. For my sake, the world was created. And the other, I am dust and ashes. The wisdom speaks to us based on where our ego and where our sense of self lie. When we're allowing the world to step on us, if we even have the power to stop it, and destroy our sense of worth, which we have the power to hold on to our sense of worth. We need to remember that for our sake, the world was created. For your sake, the world was created. When we're doing this, the soul crushing of another, we need to find more humility and remember that we're dust and ashes. And misogyny confuses the world into thinking those two proverbs apply distinctly based on gender. And that is the opposite of the intent of the message. As if the world were created only for men and women were but dust and ashes. And that is messaging that has lasted so long. And if that feels extreme, take a closer look at how men and women are spoken of in the general public. I don't have to give examples of that. On the schoolyard, in your work meetings. And I don't think that's far off how culture functions at its worst. And it functions at its worst far too often. But if each child that's born is another redeemer, if we each have worth and we each have a saving agency to bring to creation, then that potential for goodness is inherent. And we're creating communities to heal our wounds and to raise the next generation and the next generation in that truth. The potential for goodness also obligates us in the face of a world full of struggle. If we have agency, goodness obligates us to use that agency for the betterment of one another. To do otherwise is to turn our heads from another's needs, to be complicit in systems of oppression and indifference that churn through the lives of our children and adults and through our own lives. The demand this fourth stone places upon us is the perennial question: do I live into this holy work? At times of hardship, it may be enough simply to just survive or to just heal, and only you know that. But when we have the capacity to ease the suffering of those around, goodness obligates us to live into this holy work. At those times of strength, living into this holy work means taking seriously when another speaks up about violence or coercion done to them. And to be sure, when we're going through those times of hardship, living our authentic self is the first movement toward living into this holy work. Amen, and blessed be. And I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and sing hymn number 1028, The Fire of Commitment.
Fights for
Yes, thank you. Life at Community Church is busy. Whether we are online or in person, it is our hope that wherever you are and in whatever way you are comfortable engaging in the mission and ministry of this church, that we have provided opportunities for you. If you are streaming this service live and would like to join others for fellowship, click the link on our webpage at 3 p.m. to enter our Zoom room, and for everyone's safety, cameras need to be turned on. On August 29th, from 4:30 to 7 p.m., our member Ellen Mandelbaum will host an art reception at 10 Park Avenue in apartment 16K. All are welcome, and I have to say, if you haven't seen it, it is exquisite. Interested in joining one of Reverend Jude's Wellspring groups this September? They are small groups where Reverend Jude facilitates collaborative spiritual direction in a UU context. Atheists to humanists to theists are all welcome, and everyone in between. Email Reverend Jude to express your interest, and a schedule will be announced later this month. We are a 7-day church. We have programs running all throughout the week, and you can find more information in the program and on our website. Our ushers are going to pass a plate around for our collection. If you are new here, please let the plate go by you with no pressure to give. We are glad for your presence. All gifts offered are accepted in gratitude.
I invite you now to join with me in our spoken in unison extinguishing of the chalice that's printed in the order of service. Knowing how quickly the flame of truth may be extinguished, how easily the chalice of fellowship broken, let us be vigilant in faith, keep peace in our hearts, and make care for one another the watchword of our lives together, so our light goes out everywhere into the world. For those who see God, may God be with us. For those who embrace life, may life return our affections. For those who seek a right path, may a way be found and the courage to take it, move by move. For this is the day we are given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Amen.